This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, the refugee fiasco in Europe and the catastrophe of the EU. Our very special guest this evening, Dr. Bruce Thornton, a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. Dr. Thornton, what an honor and privilege to have you on the Glazov Gang.
Thanks, Jamie.
Let us begin with the refugee fiasco in Europe. How would you introduce this subject to our audience?
I think the first important point is to realize this is nothing new. All that's new is the scale that we're seeing, which is a consequence of the disastrous foreign policy of the Obama administration. The problem with immigration, particularly Muslim immigration, we can see it as early as 1968 when Enoch Powell, conservative MP, made his famous Rivers of Blood speech when he warned his countrymen about allowing large numbers of culturally different, religiously different people in. So what we're seeing is simply a magnification of a process that has been steadily going on since the book I did in 2007. I talked about this, Decline and Fall, Europe's Slow Motion Suicide. And you had the boats collapsing, you had the drowning. All we're seeing is just a larger order of magnitude of this problem.
So, Dr. Thornton, all of this has been happening, and in terms of the crisis now, all very predictable.
Absolutely. It was predicted by Enoch Powell, 1973. The French travel writer and novelist Jean Raspail published his famous and prophetic Camp of the Saints. Everybody's known this. This should not come as a surprise to anybody.
Expand a little bit for us on the catastrophe of the EU. Why is it such a catastrophe?
Well, it's first predicated on a dubious proposition, which is that Europe had entered a post-national phase. Europe had learned its lesson in World Wars I and II about the dangers of nationalism. They were going to create a new world order that transcended nationalism and that would create a centralized legal authority, judicial authority, regulatory authority in the EU. And what they forgot, and what we're now beginning to see, is that people are members of particular communities, nationalities, ethnicities, languages, and those just all don't disappear because some elites decide that they are now passé. And to borrow an expression from Freud, it's the return of the repressed. It's national identity that has been denigrated, put down, not allowed to express itself, that is now returning under this slow developing but now accelerating pressure of Muslim immigration.
Speaking of Muslim immigration, Dr. Thornton, in the past there has been a problem with Muslim immigration and Muslim immigrants. Talk a little bit about that before we get into now Muslim immigrants flooding, and Muslim quote-unquote refugees flooding into Europe.
Well, the problem is that you have a people who are radically distinct from the Judeo-Christian tradition that created the West in the first place. And they just could not be inserted into this very different culture. And by that I mean different notions of human rights, of the role of religion in political and personal life, the role of women, etc. And there was no thought given to ensuring that these immigrants would be compelled, if they wanted to stay, to adapt to European civilization. Of course, the problem is, as we know, is that there is really no theological foundation in Islam for that sort of adaptation. it was very different from the experience we had in the United States, where we could take large numbers of Southern Italians, Slavs, Poles, Catholics at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. That caused a lot of difficulties. There was a lot of adjustment made, but you were still taking a Western peoples and integrating them into another Western peoples. What has gone on in Europe is very, very different.
And Dr. Thornton, one of the things to stress is it's not that Europe is blocking the assimilation. It's the other way around, that many immigrants from the Muslim world do not want to assimilate into any other culture. But the problem here also is aggravated in Europe, that in terms of multicultural ideology, there's not even a culture to assimilate into.
Well, there's a culture to assimilate into, but there is no imperative because of, you touched on it, of course, the doctrine of multiculturalism, which says not only that all cultures are equal, but that the West is uniquely responsible and guilty because of the alleged crimes of imperialism and colonialism. And this is seen as a sort of reparations. And so that failure of civilizational nerve created this vacuum. I think the second point is there was no demand on the part of the European elites, particularly, to set up mechanisms for assimilation. And then I think the third point that's important is they closed off their labor markets to immigration, but opened their welfare access, which is the exact opposite of what we've done in the United States. For all our problems, at least our immigrants can work. They can find jobs and work. And although some abuse the law about welfare benefits, nonetheless, it's difficult for them to do that. They have to make more of an effort. When you immigrate into Europe as a Muslim immigrant, there's a whole panoply of benefits that are available for you. Some of them more generous than what even citizens can get. And that was a big mistake, I think, also.
So, Dr. Thornton, tell us, the second and third generation of many Muslim refugees and economic migrants are now turning to terrorism. You would think that the giving of a better life and the living of a better life, increase of standard of living, would lead to a rejection of terror rather than to an embrace of terror. How does this paradigm work? Why are the children of migrants turning to terrorism?
Well, there are immigrants, as in this country, who are grateful, who are making an attempt despite the barriers. The problem is the same problem with the migrants coming in right now. We don't know who is who, and the Europeans don't know who is who, and they have left some of these populations to fester in ghettos, basically the banlieues of Paris, the dish cities of Amsterdam, where they have rationalized their neglect as respect for their culture, that they could keep their culture intact. And so a lot of these second, third generation are in this strange limbo between a Western civilization that they find attractive, many are attracted to, but then that collides with their faith. And is for many of them to resolve that conflict, that painful conflict, is to do what Islam is doing in general in terms of its failure to come to terms with modernity, which is to turn to the 7th century, 8th century, the Salafists, so-called, those Muslims who conquered two empires and almost conquered Europe, and to say, well, what we need for our psychic discontent is to return to that purity and to Sharia and to jihad against our traditional enemies. And again, nobody's going to claim that that is every Muslim that is immigrating. But the problem is we don't know what the proportion is. And this is the same issue when we hear people tell us that, well, 1.6 billion Muslims, the vast majority of them are moderates, etc. that's magical thinking. None of these people can tell you exactly how they know that and how they can distinguish them. And so you allow them to immigrate en masse without any vetting, which is not going on so far into Europe. Then what you're simply doing is you're rolling the dice with your own citizens' lives, that most of them are going to be okay. And as we've already seen with the London tube bombing, the Madrid bombing, those were immigrant children. The London bombers had received £500,000 in welfare payments. So not only are you letting them in, you're subsidizing them, but yet not taking the steps necessary to sort them out so that those who do want to become Western, in effect, might have a chance to do that.
Dr. Thornton, thank you for sharing all your wisdom with us. We just got 2 minutes left. Let's focus back on America, the United States, under the Obama administration right now. What's happening in this context in terms of the Muslim refugees and what Obama has recently decided to do and the challenge and threat it poses to this nation?
Well, let's remember that these influxes of Muslims started accelerating with the Bush administration. So this also for us is not a new problem. Obama wanting, I believe, 10,000 Syrians to come in. And we face the same difficulty, which is that there's at least nobody has publicized, nobody has told us, the voters, the citizens, these are the steps we are taking to ensure that these people are only economic migrants or refugees, true refugees seeking asylum, where they're just going to be let in. But even if we did do that vetting, you raised, Jamie, the issue, maybe that first generation, but what about the second, what about the third? That's what we're seeing now in Milwaukee with the Somalis that have been implicated in terrorism, because we suffer from some of the same civilizational diseases that Europe is, and that is a failure of confidence in our own civilization and this multicultural delusion that all people are really just like us and they just wear different costumes. And that I think is the fundamental failure that we're experiencing.
Dr. Thornton, thank you so much for joining the Glazov gang this evening.
My pleasure, my friend.
To our audience, read Bruce Thornton, Dr. Bruce Thornton at frontpagemag.com. His brilliant and profound articles are at frontpagemag.com. And Dr. Bruce Thornton is a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. Dr. Thornton, we hope to see you again soon on the Glazov gang.
Of course. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you so much. And we'll see you soon on the Glazov gang. Good night.